Nature et Connexion.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes et bienvenue dans ce nouvel épisode de Nature et Connexion. Aujourd'hui, c'est un épisode un peu particulier parce que mon invité est américain et que cet épisode va être enregistré en anglais. Donc c'est parti, je passe en anglais. Hi everyone, I'm Justine from Nature and Connection, the podcast. Today I'm with Jon Young. Hi Jon.
Hello Justine, hi everybody.
So Jon, you are a deep nature, people and self-connection researcher. You are a mentor, you are a naturalist, a wildlife tracker, an author, a workshop leader, consultant, a storyteller. You have so many sides.
Don't forget musician.
Yeah, and musician, we can see that, yeah. You have been mentored in deep nature connection by your own grandmothers, by Tom Brown Jr., by a lot of other elders and experts. And you are also the author of What the Robin Knows and The Coyote's Guide to Connecting to Nature. And you are the reason why so many people worldwide, me included, go sit in nature every day in the same place. So today we're going to talk about parenthood, nature and community. But first, can you tell us more about yourself, your background, who you are, what do you do, what's your mission in life?
Well, gosh, every time someone sits next to me on an airplane that I don't know and asks me what I do, I don't ever know what to tell them, So this has always been a challenge for me. Right now I'm living with my partner, Sarah, and my two youngest children, Willa and Finch, who at this time are 18 and one is going to be 16 soon. And I have 6 children altogether and then 2 grandchildren through my daughter and then 3 with my son, Aiden. So at this point, the next generation is expanding.
Yeah, you have a whole tribe.
I have a tribe, yes. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains on the edge of a very, very beautiful wild place near the Pacific Ocean and south of San Francisco and north of Santa Cruz. And what I do is my mission, when I wake up in the morning, what I always check in with is when I think about what numerous elders from many different parts of the world, from Europe, from Africa, from North America, from Polynesia, from Australia, what these elders have passed down to me, to us, to our generation is so important, but also almost completely forgotten in our times. And I say almost completely because there's a few really good people who are on it and really trying to help us get back, all these pieces that used to exist several thousand years ago. We all had them and they were just part of our culture. And they really contributed to our well-being in a lot of ways. And so when I wake up in the morning, I think about that bundle of universal teachings that really affects our nervous system in a positive way. And then I think about the future generations who I'll never live to see, 100 years from now. And think about how to make sure what was given to me and to those that I work with, that we can make sure it gets to them, to L1 as well, right? Like that this has to live beyond me. I spent my whole adult life, starting in 1979, researching and testing things. I studied anthropology, but I did not consider myself an anthropologist because I was not interested in their methods. I was interested in their context. I was interested in getting to know what they know and be exposed to the resources and to meet the people so I could directly interact with them and observe what I see. How are they doing things, right? Because I wasn't looking for theories or anthropology back in the 1970s had very specific methodologies that I found very much unrelated to my inquiry and to my research, Because what I wanted to understand was, so I sat around the fire with some of my friends who had also grown up with Tom Brown, and this was probably right around the time my research started. All those young people had a very deep, heartfelt connection to the earth. They really were kind people. They really knew how to look after each other. They looked after their families. They were concerned about the well-being of the future. And it was all coming from inside. Tom never once tried to influence the way we thought about things. He never once put his ideas on us. In fact, what he did was he led us into experiences and just asked us questions and then listened to our stories and then asked us more questions. He never said, oh, you should do this or you should do that, right? He was not imposing his beliefs. And without that, all these young people that he had influenced had this profound connection to the earth, to themselves, to each other. They felt this lineage that I'm talking about, this thought about ancestors and what they gave to us, and they thought about the future. Very caring people. And I was really curious, at 19, I was already a tracker at that time. So I'm already, looking at patterns all the time, right? Yeah. Why is the fox going here? Why is the raccoon going there? Right? Why did the hawks all leave all of a sudden? Or why, this kind of thing. My brain is always doing that. So when I'm looking at people, I'm also asking lots of questions. Why these friends, these 4 friends sitting around the fire with me, there's 5 of us, we all went to the same high school. And we all had mutual friends who did not get mentored by Tom Brown. Those friends, though we shared friendship and a lot of commonality, we would do things together, we would have fun together. They did not have these intrinsic qualities that the 5 of us possessed. And the only thing we could come to was, what was it that Tom did with us that caused us to shift and then what our friends did not receive, the ones who were not mentored by Tom, they thought that we were foolish for caring about the earth. They thought that we should grow up and join the real world and get real jobs. And, there was like a very clear cultural separation of perception, We remained friends with those people, but I got very interested. Now, what is it that Tom did with us? Is there a way to identify that in a universal way that we could reach many more children? Because already at the age of 19, I'm already thinking about the children in my neighborhood. I'm looking around at the little kids around my neighborhood, and I'm thinking about, okay, I was born and raised here. This is where I've been sitting every day in the same spot for 8 years, right? Like, I really feel this is my home. I want to help the children who live around this area, and I want them to have the same thing I had. And that's how I started, right? So I started to try to understand, what is this invisible thing that we couldn't put our finger on at 19 years old?
Yeah. What happened to you to be so connected? Yeah.
And I did a lot of tracking of myself, of my family. I discovered something that really kind of surprised me, which was that my grandmothers from both my Polish side of my family, all these older people here in this picture, as well as my Irish ancestors on my father's side, they had grown up on farms. They grew up hunting. They grew up fishing. They grew up foraging for wild mushrooms. They grew up in the country in a cultural enclave of, like all the Polish and Lithuanian people were living around each other. All the Irish people were living around each other. So they maintained some of their cultural threads, and some of those threads, most powerful threads, besides storytelling and music, was also what the grandmothers knew about raising children close to the earth. And that, if it wasn't for my grandmothers, when I met Tom Brown at 10 years old, he wouldn't have given me the time of day, because he was looking for somebody who could have learned from Stalking Wolf, from grandfather. He was looking for someone that, if he made a suggestion about something that I might try, that he would expect that I would go do it and then come back and tell him what happened. But my grandmother had been doing that with me since I was a very little boy.
Yeah, you were already used to it.
I had like a momentum. You know, our colleague Matt Goff from Alaska, he likes to say, it's like every time a child goes out on the landscape, has an experience, and comes back to an open arm reception from a grandmother or a grandfather who asks them lots of questions with real honest curiosity and really admires that child's uniqueness, you know, and just sees the specialness of that individual and helps to bring that out and cultivate that while asking clever questions to get that child to go back and live that experience again and glean more understanding, more awareness, more information from their own experience, right? Every time that happens, and that's what my grandmother did. Could be as simple as, Jonathan, Nanny would like to make an apple pie. Would you go out into the orchard and pick some nice apples for Nanny? And together we'll make a pie. You know, so that sounds simple, right? I'd go out, I'd grab a few apples, put them in a little basket, bring them back in. And she looks at them and admires them. She says, oh, you picked such good apples. You know, look at these. They're so perfect apples you picked. She said, how did you know not to pick the ones with the little brown spots? Oh, Nanny, you taught me that last time. I'll look around to see if they have the little holes in them or the brown spots. And she said, well, did you see any of those bees out there when you were out there? You know, she's asking me questions like, how about any butterflies? Did you hear any birds? Like, so it was never just about the apples, right? She very cleverly made me pay more attention. So I'd go back out the next time for the next thing she sent me to do. And I knew she was going to ask me questions that I wouldn't think of. So I had to like carry Nanny with me in my mind, you know, which is a powerful old way. This is what the Bushmen do. Like, this is something that I'm like, wow, that survived through my grandmother. Right? In spite of all the conquering and all the conquest and wars and destruction of indigenous culture in Europe, some of those things didn't get conquered. Right? And I was fascinated by that. And then I started to track invisible threads. What other invisible thread am I not seeing? Right? So that's what I studied in anthropology. And my professors did not believe in anything that I was talking about, right? Like, they just said, that's not a real thing, you know, nobody studied that before. There's no information on that. I said, but I don't need anyone to have studied it. I just need to read the stories of the elders and the observations of first contact people. How are they with their children? How do they behave? What do they do? How does the family structure work? Like all these things, you know? So that's what led, you know, and I have to say, I started doing that with great passion in 1979. I'm still doing it. So many years later, like this has just been a consistent thread for me. That's why the people in the seat next to me in the airplane don't want me to talk to them after that. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
It depends how long is the flight.
True.
Yeah, so all this questioning leads you to study some different tribes around the world. And I know that you had a special bond with the San Bushmen from the Kalahari. They are one of the last people living totally in connection to nature. And I was wondering, can you tell us what can we learn from them about their parenting, about their connection to the community and to nature?
Ooh, where to start?
It's a big one too.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting, Justine. I've brought many parents, modern parents, with me to visit them, right? And there's been some grandparents who have come as well, right? Not all together, and they were so curious about the Bushman's parenting. So I've had a lot of conversations with them about this. But where to start here? Well, you know, Again, remember, I studied anthropology, but you could say I was minoring in anthropology. It wasn't my major. I was also studying natural history, you know, nature, essentially. Also human religion and psychology. So I'm really trying to understand human beings in a particular context, which is, again, why are some so disconnected to themselves and to the earth and to other people? And why are some so connected? And that was my big question, right? I did listen to my anthropology professors about one thing. They said, you can't study every indigenous culture. You just can't. There's too many. And you could live 100 years and never study them all. So you have to focus in one particular area, you know, whether you're going to study, for instance, seafaring people of Polynesia, right? Or you're going to study forest people from the Amazon. But I was thinking about Tom Brown coming from grandfather Stalking Wolf, an Apache, and I thought, okay, so Tom is carrying this thing in him that's invisible to me, but it's powerful enough to change my life and change the lives of my friends.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna figure out if maybe it came from Stalking Wolf. So that I thought, okay, I know enough stories from growing up with Tom, heard lots of stories about him, got to read some of Tom's books. He only had 2 out at the time, you know, and when I was doing this research. But I was also working with him at the Tracker School as an instructor, which opened in 1978. And I could ask him questions, right? He was super interested in my research also. He thought it was really a cool idea. He thought it would be really helpful, you know? And so I finally started to think about, okay, if I'm going to focus on indigenous people, what kind of category can I pick? There wasn't a lot of stuff about grandfather's people anywhere in the literature. The Apaches were so good at hiding and being, what's the word, like camouflaged, but also being very clever about what not to reveal to the white men. You know, so they were suspicious of anthropologists, and there was only one anthropologist that I could find who really got to be connected to a particular group of Apaches, but it wasn't grandfather's Apaches. So, okay, what does grandfather have that might inform my research? And I said, okay, well, they're hunter-gatherer, nomadic people, right? They don't build permanent settlements. They move with the animals. They move with the seasons. They come from landscape that affords a lot of sandy places where tracking can be learned much more easily. And, you know, they're small band people. You know, they don't build big complex societies. They stay in small family units that grow to a certain size, and then they break into smaller pieces. So I thought, okay, well, that's a good category. So then I presented that to my professors, and then they said, oh, well, then you should open your horizons, because you could include people like the San Bushmen who fit that whole thing that you just described. They're the same, and the Aboriginals in Australia. And, you know, so then we started to identify different groups. And then I just began to devour anything and everything I could get, you know, film reels from people who were filming them in black and white, you know, with no sound, or, you know, like reading lots and lots of accounts. And I kept finding, as I started to say, what do all these people have in common that might point to these invisible things? You know, like, for instance, if they're doing things, all of them in different parts of the world are doing things that we modern people are no longer doing. Could the solution to this connection lie in those things that we don't do anymore? And can we take these universal things that they're all doing, different ways in different cultures, but they're all accomplishing the same thing? Can we learn from that and somehow incorporate it into programmatic service to children and adults? And that's what I was doing. Now, as I worked, I had to create a table of different categories across the top of the table, and the names of the tribes and the places that they were from down the side of the table, and start writing the things that I saw consistently showing up. I noticed that the Bushmen had nothing in the categories around warfare, around hurting other human beings, right? They didn't have a war culture at all. And I found that very curious. But when it got to the things around building community and building relationship with nature, the Bushmen had consistently more things in their column than any of the other tribes. But the other tribes had war. I could sort of see the tracks of human beings being horrible to each other, and this disease of conquest spreading around the world and causing people to leave pieces of their culture. But I think because the San people were in a very, very difficult place for other people to live, they had developed such a deep relationship with the Kalahari, they were able to survive, even thrive, where other cultures could not. So I think they were left alone long enough, but they are also found to be genetically related to every human being on the planet. In a very direct way. Like, for instance, if you trace the ancestral DNA of the San Bushmen, you find that all other races around the world, quote unquote, come from the same common ancestor, and that these are the descendants of the common ancestor of all human beings. So that I didn't find that out till 20 years after I began my research, but that made so much sense to me. Okay, so they're kind of like the wellspring of human culture, and they're still living it now. And they seem to have the most tools in their toolbox for deep connection. And then when I met Ingwe, who helped me, when he was an elder that I met who grew up with the Bushmen, he was born in 1914 in South Africa. He spent the first 6 years of his life with Bushman grandmothers, right? So it made me think, wow, if my grandmother from Ireland, whose culture had suffered a lot of loss, could do for me what she did, imagine what these Bushman grandmothers were doing for this little English boy.
Yeah.
Right? And then also he mentioned the grandfathers, because when he got to a certain age, the older men got interested in him. His family moved to Kenya in 1920. And there he found people who were related to the Bushmen there, as well as the Akamba people, who were his only neighbors. There was no white neighbors for 28 miles. So the only people he could play with were the little Bushman kids, the little Akamba kids. And he was adopted eventually by those families and became part of that village. And he spoke more Kikamba than he did English. And, he became fluent in their cultural ways. So I met him in his 70s. And he had great admiration for the San Bushmen. And he was so fascinated by the fact that my research had found that they had so many practices that we could learn from. And this is how, I began to look even closer at these people. And in 2010, I began to visit them directly. I have become really good friends with several families there, and try to visit them as often as I can, where I've had the opportunity to spend time with them in their ways of interacting with each other in the land. And it's been really, really, really rewarding. Now, the reason I would say, why should we learn from these people? The first thing they would tell me to tell you, which they've done, please tell people that we really we're worried about the rest of the people on this planet, they say. We're worried because they're not happy like we are. We're worried because their families don't work well. We're worried because they're sad and that they don't have hope for the future. And so we want them to come learn from us, right? So they say, Jon, please tell them our stories so they can feel us through your stories, right? They not only give me permission, but they insist that I do this, right? They really want their stories told, and they want everyone in the world to understand what they know so they can be happy like they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so funny, because some people think that maybe they are really poor or they have nothing, and then maybe they are not as happy as we can be with all the things that we have. And I think maybe they are the most happy person in the world, no?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I must say, when I land in Botswana and I go out to visit these people, when I start approaching them for the first time in maybe a year or 6 months, right? But in September, I went there and it had been 4 years because of the pandemic, right? I was so worried that a lot of them would have died from the pandemic, and that everything fell apart, and you know what I mean? Like, I had all these worries.
Yeah.
And when I came to see them, oh my God! First of all, before you see them, you feel them. You feel like you're walking into a bubble of energy. And that energy just fills your body with like this happiness, right? Like, they hold this strong field of love and happiness, and it's so strong. And it's not even what is being said, like, because first of all, I don't speak their language. And if there's only one translator and there's several of us and there's different conversations going on, you would think that, you feel like an outsider, but it never feels that way. They are unconditionally accepting and loving. They're absolutely happy that you came to visit them. They want to gift you with their attention, their presence. They speak to you in their language with such feeling and such gestures and animation with their hands and with their facial expression, their body language. You almost don't need a translator to understand what they're saying. Like, that's how I feel, you know what? And when the translator does translate, I'm like, oh, wow, I got 80% of that without even knowing what they were saying, because they're so able to connect, you know. One of the elders in residence that helped me, he was a consultant with us, but basically starting in 1996, Gilbert Walkingbull. He grew up in a very intact cultural setting, away from mission schools, away from the influences of the white people, and grew up with his grandmothers and his extended family in a very rural place. So English was his second language. He spoke his native Lakota. That's what he spoke. You know, he didn't start learning English till he was 19 years old. When I met him, he was in his 70s, and he observed that the children that we had been supporting, mentoring with this research, you know, that at this point now, I started in 1983. This was 1996. So I had 13 years of practical application with live people to get feedback, to see what's working, what's not working. You know what I mean? So we had refined the methods pretty good, and we kind of were now clear what really works. Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature kind of picks up a lot of that, but not all of it. The book, we couldn't make it any fatter because it would have broken in half. So we reserved.
Pretty heavy.
Yeah, it's a heavy book. So this elder, he had these very powerful wisdom keepers as grandparents and great grandparents. They told him about these attributes that people, if they displayed these attributes, these people were leaders for the future. And they called them the sacred attributes. And when he saw the children that we'd been working with for a couple of years, they were teenagers, he got very excited because he said, oh, these children have these attributes. And my grandfather told me about them so long ago. And ever since, I've been looking at young people to see if they have these attributes. I haven't seen it anywhere, not among my people, not among, you know, other Indian tribes I visit, you know, as a cultural elder, not among the white people, you know, not among the Latino people that he was friends with. He just wasn't seeing it anywhere. And when he saw it in these children, to him, it felt like an answered prayer or something. Like he was so excited, like he'd been decades looking for these attributes and not seeing them. And all of a sudden, here's all these young people that all have them. And he was like blown away, like it was a miracle to him. And I said to him, you know, after he stopped working for the day with the children, and we went over to where he lived, and I sat with him and I said, what are you seeing in these children? You know, what are these attributes that you're talking about that you're so excited about? And he told me what they were. And I agreed with him that they had all of those attributes. But what I knew, Justine, was when we started working with those children, they didn't have those attributes. They didn't start with those attributes. They weren't born with them. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It was the effect of what we were holding as a culture, as a program over time that caused this outcome.
It's like you with your friends when you were young.
Yeah, yes. Okay. Thank you for making that connection. I didn't see that, but yes, exactly like that. Yes. Well, we looked at those attributes. We had to translate them out of Gilbert's culture because they were very specifically referencing certain things in their language and their oral tradition and all that. And we're like, okay, but what is it pointing at? You know, and we universalized them to where it would make sense across all cultures, right? And this quiet mind being the most important one. That's the first one. And then there's happiness of a child, you know, that happiness at the Bushman exhibit. There's this vitality is the third one, where this electricity in the body, like they have all this juice to go do stuff, right? It's like passion, curiosity, it's alive, the body's alive, you know? And then the fourth one is kind of the opposite of that one. It's like this ability to be totally still and to be able to listen unconditionally to anyone who's talking to you, right? So when they sat around the fire, these young people, they would tell stories to each other, and the other ones would go spellbound quiet, right? But even moments later, they were all animated and full of electricity, right? And then all of a sudden, they're sitting by the fire as still as a lake with no ripples on it, listening to the story of another one of their peers so respectfully, so deeply. And then there's this empathy, which comes from connection itself. And then comes being really helpful, like using their awareness to not only see birds and plants in the landscape, but also using their awareness to see what needs to be done next and doing it without being told. So they were always one step ahead. They didn't need to be managed or bossed around. They were always really helpful. And then they have this sense of awe and reverence for life. You know, they just are fascinated by little insects. They love the color of the sunset. They love the song of the bird. And, oh, that's so beautiful. You know, they have that awe really as a characteristic. And then there's this capacity for love, which is so strong. So these 8 attributes. Now, I bring this up because I go around to different communities all over the world, and I see groups of people, and some of them exhibit the attribute and some of them don't. Especially the young people, especially the teenagers, they don't exhibit the attributes in most places that I go. Mm-hmm. And I thought that that was hormonal, right? They're getting to that age where they're going to go through puberty. I thought, okay, well, they're just grumpy, right? Rebelling against their parents, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I understand. When I went to see the Bushmen, it was the first time I'd ever been in a community where people of every single age all have the attributes, from the 90-year-olds down to the babies and everyone in between. But what blew my mind was that the teenagers were so soft and so open and so playful and loving. And like, I'm like, wow, it's a myth that I'm holding in my mind that we have to lose the attributes in late childhood and then find them again as adults. That is a sign of a broken culture now. I understand that. And what we need to do is really understand these little points of leverage that we can use as parents, as aunts, uncles, as grandparents, to do that sort of magical, invisible thing that really supports the people on their journey so that they don't lose those attributes. That's my greatest wish. If I had a magic wand, I could go like this. Everyone in the world would have that. So you were talking about, well, you were talking about the Bushmen, that, you know, not having money, being poor, you know, but there's many kinds of riches.
Yes.
And there's also many kinds of poverty. And I would argue, as my friend Dr. Bill Sutherland, who spent lots of time with the Bushmen, when he looks at modern society, he says we have to admit our impoverishment. You know, you could have a nice car, 2 houses, a vacation house, a sailboat, you know, but your culture is completely gone, and there's no, you know, it's impoverished. Your kids are growing up depressed. They're ended up in college addicted to drugs, or they're suicidal, right? Like, there's people hate each other in the family. They grew up together jumping on the trampoline, but when they're adults, they're suing each other and hating each other because grandpa died and left a fortune to them, and now they're all fighting over the money, right? That's not rich. That's not rich. That's very poor. That's an impoverishment. So there's different kinds of riches. We can have material riches and we can have cultural riches. And I think we need both, honestly. You know?
Yeah. And about the parenting of the Bushmen, do you have an example of the way they can raise their children to be that kind of connecting people?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, like you, the babies are always on the mothers. The babies are always on the mothers, constantly. They wear them on slings, either on their back or in front. And when the babies get to a certain age, they're always with their mothers, holding onto their mother's skirt, right? But I will also say that when mom is burnt out from the demands of this baby, because it happens, I witness it.
Okay.
You can see the frustration on the mother's face. You can feel she's just so tired of this little being, like demanding and demanding and demanding, and she cannot deliver. She'll literally take the baby and go over and drop the baby on the lap of a teenager.
A teenager, wow.
And because the teenagers are open and soft and they haven't lost the attributes, they have this natural instinct to play and to tease and to love and, you know, to distract. And there's a magic between the baby and the teenager that it does not exist between the baby and the mother, the baby and the father, the baby and the grandparents. The teenagers have a particular magic for, you know, babies. And it's really beautiful to witness. It's like, I'm like, oh my God, right?
Yes.
What I need as a parent is to get really super connected teenagers and have them hang around. And when I get frustrated, I just go put the baby on their lap. That's what I need.
Where can we get that teenagers?
I think you can find them on LinkedIn.
I would love that.
Yeah, just look up teenagers with the 8 attributes of connection.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that the teenager. I thought you would say that they would give the baby to another mother or someone, but yeah, the teenagers. Wow.
You do see that too. You know, you see babies being passed between women. You do see that. That's happening as well. But I found it fascinating. In the moment of highest frustration and mother burnout, it was the teenagers who were solving this. And you know what? The teenagers didn't even show an inkling of like, oh, don't drop that kid here. You know, like you're spoiling our time. There was no resentment whatsoever. They were like happy to receive these babies. And you have to imagine when they were babies and their mother had mother burnout and was frustrated, and she passed the baby to another mother, but that mother was also frustrated. You know, that baby is now that teenager.
Yeah.
You know, they must have this memory. So I look at these, there's layers in the way that their extended family is working, you know? So I also noticed this when I was working with homeschooled children. And hey, thankfully, when I started my program in 1983, I was only running it for a few months at 23 with a new baby, okay? Aiden. And in 1983, a new baby running a school. I don't really know what I'm doing. I've just spent the last 5 years in college researching, and now I have to run a school. I didn't study how to run a school. All of a sudden, I'm like, I'm in over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got these families coming to me asking me to work with their children, their homeschool families. A few months later, I met Ingwe, who grew up with the San Bushmen and the Akamba, who witnessed and saw all the things that I just talked about and understood that that is the way to build a village right there. And one of the first things he did was he said, John, I want you to notice how the young children that we're homeschooling right now, you know, 5, 6, 7, how they don't look up to you or Ingwe in the same way they look up to those teenagers from the high school program that we're working with. They're fascinated by the older children. And so what we have to do is we have to help these older children, these teenagers, understand how they affect the young people and make them aware of it so that they can welcome that gift that they hold and be of service to the village. So I learned early that when I tried to, for instance, teach my son Aiden how to do certain things in nature, he was rebellious against me. If I tried the tricks that Tom Brown did with me or my grandmother did with me, they didn't work because there's a dynamic between father and son that is different between grandmother and grandson. The grandmother can get away with things that the father cannot get away with. That's just how it works. There's no changing that.
That's nice to hear because I can feel it with my kids, my oldest.
Yeah.
It's so complicated for me to connect him to nature because it feels like he doesn't want to.
Yeah, well, because
when I'm
making
asking
me do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And he is connected, but when I ask things, he doesn't want to do it.
Right. Well, that's what you know, who's done a lot of really beautiful research on this, somebody who you really want to get on your podcast who also speaks English, is Darcia Narvaez. And she put out a whole theory about something called the evolved nest. And she took all of these same things that I'm sharing with you, and she put together a whole pattern. And I believe her book is called The Evolved Nest. And it would be so worth checking out Darcia's work. And I will share a link to that, so you all can find your way to Darcia Narvaez.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. Her book is called The Evolved Nest: Nature's Way of Raising Children and Creating Connected Communities.
Perfect.
Yeah, it is perfect. I met her because I was teaching at a conference in 2017 at Notre Dame University, sharing my practical research with this academic conference. And when I heard her presentation at lunch, I'm like, wow, this woman, she has mapped it all out, and she's a parent and she's a psychologist, and she's brilliant and she's lovely. And she's good friends with a lot of indigenous communities. She often works with a Lakota elder by the name of Don Trent Jacobs, otherwise known as Four Arrows. And they've got a lot of good resources that would actually map out. And she's done all the psychology, like the research of the neurobiological impact of this nested community, right? So you have layers. You've got the young children, you've got the older children, you've got the teens, young adults. When you think of it as nested layers of age and stage of life, and that they all have different roles in parenting, in supporting, co-parenting. They call it allo-parenting, meaning like borrowed parents. When I grew up, I had a lot of quote unquote aunts and uncles who were not related to me by blood, but because my parents were like sister and brother to them, I ended up calling them Aunt Barb and Uncle Dave. No relationship, but now their children are my cousins, right? So my mother had one sister, and so you could say the extended family was small biologically, but we had Aunt Barb and Uncle Dave. We had Uncle Bay and his wife, Yvonne. And then we had the Andrew husband and wife, the Andrews, Al Andrews. And then we had these families with all of their kids who we all got together on a regular basis, for weekends or 2 weeks at the beach. But these families stayed together over many, many years. In fact, I just grew up with them. They were my relatives, but they weren't related to me by blood. And because all of these people, one thing they had in common was that they had extended families like my parents did. The big enclave of all these Polish and Lithuanian people together, the big Irish families, right? So here, they all knew the value of this. So I really have to credit my parents with having understanding, some wisdom about it's good for the kids to grow up with a bunch of different parental figures, that they can go to. Right? So if I felt upset with my mother, I always could go to my aunt, or I could go to Uncle Dave, who's not related to me, but he would always help me.
Yeah, it's good for the kids and it's good for the parents,
Oh, absolutely great for the parents. The parents had so much fun because of it, because get all the parents together, they all start having fun and telling stories and cooking together, and and we all just disappeared and went out and played, and we just had so much fun, and they weren't hovering over us or telling us what to do. It was just this beautiful experience. And, Yngwie was very quick to point out that we needed to set up our community around Wilderness Awareness School using that same model, that he would be the grandfather because there wasn't anybody else around yet who could be an elder. So he would play the role of elder. I would take the role of the young adult who would take the young people on adventures into the wilderness. Yngwie would work with the parents. And when we came back together around the fire, he was really helping us to cultivate that conduct that brings about the 8 attributes, but it wasn't just about taking kids in the woods. It was also about village building. So if you take them out in the woods, you got to bring them back to a fire where they can tell their stories. And Ingwe taught the parents how to listen. Because this mother would keep interrupting her child when he was talking, and he would have to say, then he would say, John, take the kids out again, and then he would then have to talk to the parents again, you can't do that, you have to just be quiet, and you have to let go of your need to control your child. You cannot do that, right? You have to know that the child is a gift to the world, not a gift to you. It's a gift because you love your child and your child loves you, but that child doesn't belong to you, nor does their future. That child has to be given the freedom to become themselves. And maybe it's going to be this lady over here who brings that out, and you can't feel resentment for that, because you're the mother, and he had to really work with them. And it took him a while to kind of let go, right? But then when they did, this gorgeous little community of families started to grow around these kids who started to grow up in nature around us. And the thing about this is you don't have to do much for the children. They come with all this software that automatically knows how to do all this stuff. And it's really the adults that need it. It's not the kids who need the training,
Yes. And as a father at that time, you started a family, you said. Did you feel that the community you already had, like the other families you grew up with, and the community you were building with Wilderness Awareness School, did you feel that it was helping for you as a father to raise your kids, and the link to nature too?
Oh, yes. I mean, I would never... if I was going to raise children again, I would never not spend a huge amount of time with them in nature. Because nature mentors the children into the best version of themselves. There's no question about that. There's nothing we can do in our modern society, no matter how detailed the pedagogy and how structured the program and how skilled the teachers with however many letters they have to their name. Nature is the most superior teacher for children. Nothing comes close. If you use that model where the kids go out and do stuff, especially not with their parents, but with the aunts and uncles and older, cooler kids, this works brilliantly. This is how my kids grew up, right? I don't have to mentor my son Aiden because I mentored Dan Gardoki since he was a teenager, and now he's an older teenager, and he's like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you can help me. I don't know what to do." He said, "Well, maybe I could take your son and go do stuff with him in the woods." I'm like, "Oh my God, yes."
Wow.
And could you help him learn bird language? Because I can't seem to get him to pay attention. He's like, "Oh yeah, definitely." And now Aiden's like, "Oh, this older kid, he's so cool." Dad's such a, he's an old fart, Dad, right? So Dan is basically passing on to my son what I passed on to him. Right, because I was Dan's uncle. Now Dan is Aiden's uncle, right? And I could never have survived. I wouldn't have survived being a parent without that.
It's so complicated. It's so lonely. It's so, yeah.
Oh, it's a terrible design. This whole idea of nuclear family.
Yeah.
Right? Nuclear, anything makes radioactive waste. And I think we just destroy human beings by making them grow in isolation without the village. I mean, it's just such a bad idea. It's such a bad idea.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And I know that you have a story about the Bushmen, about the fact that it's not a good idea to mentor your child, that they don't act like this. I think it's related to a son making fire.
Yes.
Can you tell us that story, please?
Oh my God, yeah. This story really haunted the modern parents that were with me. Because when they witnessed this, they were like, "Oh my God, I ruined my child," and they were all crying around the fire that night. I'm like, wow. Okay, so this is a big one. There was a good friend of mine who founded a wilderness school on the island of Kauai called the Kauai Nature School, I think. And his name is Matt Kirk. I started mentoring Matt when he was in his late teens, and he became, he went on the Deep Nature Connection journey as a young adult, but then he became a tracking apprentice, and we did a lot of wilderness tracking of wildlife together. And he was quite exceptional as a tracker, meaning that he wasn't just tracking animals, but tracking everything, tracking people, tracking relationships. You know, I think tracking is a really helpful tool for people to have. And I've always said it, trackers make the best mentors, right? Because you have to pay attention on so many levels if you're going to be a good mentor. So let's just start there. So I want you to say, Matt and I are standing with these other parents and one grandparent from Europe and North America. And I think there was someone from Australia there. And so we're all standing and we're with these San Bushmen. We've just been out gathering stuff and we're coming back now to make food together. And there's this 18, 19-year-old son. His name is Duma. And he's sitting on the ground. And he's sitting with his feet out in front of him, resting against his father's back. His father's name is Kakao. And Kakao's feet are out in front of him. So they're like literally using each other as backjacks, right? So Duma is trying to make a fire, but leaning against his dad. And his dad is just so relaxed. He's just such a chill guy. He's just really, really peaceful inside. And Duma's working on it, but the angle of his spindle is a little bit off. And he's not getting much smoke. And Kakao's brother, whose name is Guta, sees this. And he's Kakao's older brother. So I think Guta's maybe a little bit older than me. And Kakao is a little younger than me. So Guta sees Duma do this. And he says some words that have a bit like a lightning bolt feeling to them, right? And like all of us are like, oh, he got yelled at, right? And there was like, oh, we didn't know they yelled at each other, right? And Duma then breaks the backtrack thing with his dad and fixes his posture, and then really starts to get the smoke, right? His dad doesn't look at his brother like, why did you yell at my son? He doesn't even look at his son. Nothing. No reaction from the dad at all. Of course he has to react because now his son isn't leaning against him anymore, so now he has to put his hand down and shift the way he's sitting. That's the most reaction we get. But he shows zero facial expression about what just happened with his son and with his brother. You know, the son's uncle. And Matt, he's looking at this and he gets a smile on his face and he says to the translator, do you think I could ask a question about what I just witnessed? And the translator says, sure, they're an open book, Matt. You can ask him anything. So he says, hey, Duma, how do you feel about what your uncle just did? And Duma says, oh, Matt, I know my uncle loves me. And he wants me to be a good father and to be able to provide for my children. And he said to me, you'll never be able to provide for your family if you can't light a fire properly. So you have to show your uncle that you can make this fire. Don't be lazy about fire. Fire is special to us, right? And then Matt turns to the uncle, Guta, and says, how do you feel about that? He said, no, you know, Duma's right. He said everything that I said, and this is true. This is my job. And then he says, can I ask Kakao, the father, you know, well, why didn't you discipline your son? Why didn't you tell him how to do it? And Kakao says, that's not my job. And Matt says, well, what is your job? He says, my job is just to love him. It is my brother's job and my parents' job to discipline him. All I can do is love him. And Matt says, why? He says, because then when I'm an old man, he'll still love me and he'll take care of me like I took care of him when he was too little to take care of himself. And oh my God, if you could just see the jaws dropping of the modern people, they're like, oh no, my kids are going to put me in a nursing home when I'm old, you know? because there's a conflict of interest, right? As a parent, you want to love them, but if you're all by yourself, then you also have to discipline them, and those two things clash.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that has a lot to do with why people lose their attributes through childhood. Because parents can't be uncles, parents can't be aunties. And that is so important. That's why Darcia always emphasizes that allo-parenting, meaning literally the person that is your close relation, brother or friend, sister or friend, that can help play that role that Goethe played with Duma. Because Duma did not feel that Goethe was being mean or controlling. Like, there was none of that. It was super clean. Just like a bolt of energy, but no meaning to it, no story about it. Just feeling that he did that for me out of love. And I know he loves me. Right? Yeah. So I think that story says a lot.
Yeah, that says what we lost and what we need to find back.
Yep. Ingwe would say, you adults, you have to get over your suspicion about each other, and you have to build horizontal relationships and become like brothers and sisters so that you can help raise each other's children. He would say that again and again and again because, oh, I don't like her parenting style. Oh, I don't like the way he does this. I don't like the way she does that. Only I know how to raise my kids. He doesn't know. And Ingwe would essentially yell at them for that. Get over yourself. You don't know what you're talking about. You all have different parenting styles. None of you is right, he would say. Right? You can't all be right, and you can't all be wrong. Listen to Ingwe. I've seen how this is done with the Akaba and the Bushmen, and I've seen the results, and I've done this for the last 40 years with other families. Listen to Ingwe. Right? And eventually they would. It took them a while because they had to get over their whatever it might be, their wounds or their egos, I don't know what it is, but he really worked with them to help them to learn to love. Literally, they had to learn to reach out and touch and love again as adults because they had lost that. They were suspicious of other adults. He just pointed that out over and over and over again. And I saw so many parents crying. When I would bring the children back to the parents, the children's eyes would get really big because they could see their mom crying, And then the mom would hug Ingwe, and they're all like, what happened? What did we miss? What did we miss? But they had to really do a lot of inner tracking. They had to look at themselves to see why they had these patterns, these control patterns that just weren't working for them or their children, It's a big deal. It's not easy to do this.
No, and we need more grandparents and grandfather, grandmother like that.
Oh yes, that was one of the things that Ingwe became very concerned about. Was that he did not want to be the only elder, and he knew that he wouldn't be around forever, and he wanted to make sure there was others who understood what it meant to be an elder, and he was very diligent at adopting people and helping them and mentoring them. So whatever stage of life they were, he'd help them get to the next stage. This became one of the main important strategies for building regenerative community around nature connection work. There had to be a group of people, a guild, a specialty group, working with people who were true elders, who understood the kinds of things Ingwe did, to work in a council with the next generation coming up, so people in their 70s working with people in their 50s, right? To help them understand. Because Grandmother Charnot, who works with us at Living Connection First, was involved with a group of Indigenous elders from all over the world. They were Indigenous elders from so many different cultures, and they came together in these conferences on Zoom. And they were trying to identify, in order to put the pieces back in the culture, what do we have to do? So they were having all these breakouts and, doing all this research. And they came to this conclusion, which is somewhat terrifying and challenging, but also important to know. And that is that the culture was healthy and regenerated when there was one elder to every 7 people. And I think back to Yngwie and what fortitude that man had, because it was one elder to 250 people. And yet he was able to really accomplish a lot, right? Like, we'll call him a power elder. He was from a different class.
Yeah.
But if you think about that, like, I can't name 7 people around one elder in my life right now, where I live, and
No.
So we have a group of people within our Living Connection First Village Council that are working on helping to figure out how to get more elders up, But at the same time, you got to also bring up aunts and uncles. At the same time, you have to bring up teenagers who understand that beautiful gift that they possess with the young people, which is the one you're most interested in right now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many work to do.
Yes, on many layers.
Yeah, but it's beautiful too. Like you said, you're working for the next generations, and you and me, maybe we will not see the results, but the idea is to maybe for our kids or the kids of our kids, maybe there will be grandparents and teenagers and yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we in Jake Swamp, one of the elders I got to work with, he said to us one day, we were at this gathering of all these people who are working on this village building model with Yngwie and Jake and his wife Judy. All these elders, indigenous elders, are together with all these people, the families that we're working with, and we're having this gathering. And Jake says to us at the gathering, he says, the work is really starting to take root. He said, we should see the results of this in about 200 years. And we're like, what? Like, the message was both helpful and depressing.
Yeah.
But what he said about that was, we have to really be aware of what we're in order to do the job that we have to do right now, so that in 200 years, it comes back together, right?
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's been about 30 years since then, so there's only 170 years left. So we're good.
Yeah.
Be patient.
The good news is that there's going to be a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm definitely seeing the result. I mean, there's so many people who take this to heart, and it's complex, right? Village building is complex. It's complex. A village is made of people in their 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, right down to babies, right?
Mm.
And the village also has to include the memory and the honoring of those who have passed away, and then the prayers for those who have not yet been born. Like, each of those layers has teachings, and it requires people who have competency and understanding and how to do those things at that layer, right? So, yeah, I think start with Darcia's work. Her book, The Evolved Nest, is a good place to start, because she identifies for parents things that they can do now that are simple, right? Because listening to me, who's been studying this and working with it for almost 50 years now, I have too much in my experience and in my head to be helpful. Because you're asking like a super geek of village building and deep nature connection. Yeah, but I just want to know how to make dinner without pulling my hair out with my kid pulling at my leg. Like, give me a tip, right? I think Darcia is a good place to go, because she's addressing things at that level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to finish, to end this meeting, this podcast, do you have a message for today's parents? Just something that you can address them.
I get emotional thinking about that. I know how hard it is. And I know how much fear we all have about what's happening to our earth, what's happening to our people, and especially what's happening that our children are going to have to face when we're gone, and our grandchildren. And, you know, find your calling. Find what it is in you that connects you to the earth, that connects you to yourself, to the ancestors and the future generations, and offer that with love, offer that with generosity, with patience, with kindness. And find aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters that you can adopt as extended family, and get over your bad self. Find you inside, heal, cry, come to peace, so that you can play a role as an auntie or an uncle for the children that aren't yours, and enjoy the impact of that one simple thing. Yeah.
Thank you, John. I'm used to ask a last question to finish the podcast, and it's about sharing a story in nature. Something you want to share. I know you have a lot of stories, but is there maybe one related to parenthood, or that you would want to share?
You know, in September in 2024, Sarah and myself and another colleague, Carol, went to visit our friends, Guta and Cacao, and that family in Botswana to make sure everything's okay. We haven't seen you since before the pandemic, right? How's everybody doing? And so there were supposed to be some other people coming, but they canceled at the last minute, some more colleagues. And all of a sudden we had paid for 2 spots to go in, to leave when we left the Bushmen in the Kalahari, way out in the middle of this desert. We're going to drive many, many hours into the town of Maun. And then from there, we're going to drive many, many hours into the Okavango Delta to be with Capture Africa. In this water with elephants and hippos and lions and, you know, that. I cannot go to Botswana without going there. I have to go there. I love this place. It's my happy place on the planet. So we started to think about it. We're like, well, wait, if we don't continue to pay for these 2 spots, we can't actually do the whole thing, because it's not enough people to make it doable financially for the guides. And so we're like, well, wait, it's already been paid for. Why don't we just sponsor 2 Bushmen to come with us from the Kalahari? We'll bring them to the Delta. And we called our translator friend, and she said, oh, they won't want to go. So many people try to do that for them, but they don't like leaving their families, John. They don't want to leave, you know, what's familiar to them. They don't trust the outside world, you know. So I don't think they're going to say yes. I said, but can you please go to Guta and tell him that John wants him to come to the Delta, and to please bring his brother's grandchild. Okay, so Duma had a child who's now 14 years old. So that story that I told earlier. So this young man, Tama. So he's going to go with his great uncle. And so the translator calls back. They really surprised me. Guta said, John, if John asks me, I'll go anywhere with John.
Wow.
Tell him we're coming. Tama is coming, you know. So, wow, let me tell you something. So we spent several days with them in the Kalahari, trailing brown hyenas and jackals and looking for spring hares unsuccessfully, trailing a leopard for a long way, having so much fun with them. They are so fun, these people, okay? Well, then it's time for us to take these 2 with us for the long drive into Maun. And we get to Maun and we spend one night in a little bed and breakfast on the edge of town on the Tamalakani River. We have a lovely time there. And the people who are working at this lodge, this Airbnb, are all Tswana people. And so I'm wondering, how are the Bushmen and the Tswanas going to get along? Well, the Tswana people were just like beside themselves. Like the Bushmen are like their heroes. And they're saying, thank you so much for bringing these very special people. They're like our ancestors. They're like our teachers. And it's so good that you brought them here. It's so good of you. And they just, they hovered on these two Bushmen. They didn't get any time to themselves. And they were just telling stories and laughing and all speaking in Tswana. I didn't understand anything that was going on. I'm like, I guess we don't have to worry about Guta and Tama, right? Next morning, we get picked up by Johnson, who's our guide. And he's from, I want to say, where was he from? Zambia. But he, as a child, came to live in that area, Shirobe. So he's been there his whole life, and he's probably my age. He's in his 60s. And he's so used to people who go on these game drive, safari-type camping things, who want to be entertained and shown elephants and shown, lions, and, like you have to drive in the truck and find cool animals and stare at them and take pictures, and that's what we're here for. Oh, no. So Tama and Guta are sitting behind me and Sarah. And Carol's in the front seat, and Johnson's driving. And we drive, 20 yards out of camp. Guta's like, hey, blah, blah, and stop the truck, back up. And he's looking down. He's like, we have to look. These are tracks, right? And this is, we don't have anyone to translate because we don't have a translator with us. Johnson speaks Tswana, which is why he's our guide, right? And then Kakao also speaks Guta, so they can speak. But we don't need to speak anymore because all they want to do is anytime they see a new track they've never seen before, they have to get out and investigate and follow it and study it and imitate it and figure out what it is. And Sarah and I are in the same mindset. And so this poor guy Johnson, he's just like, he can't get to where he wants to bring us because every 10 minutes we stop and now we're walking around for a half hour looking, asking questions. And it's because they are so curious and so passionate. When they realize they don't know something, they have to know it. And they throw themselves into it with such, it's so inspiring. It's so infectious, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a superpower that we need back again. Because yes. I think when we learn, we get all serious. We make faces like this, and then we go like that. None of that, right? They just go right into playful mode. They're like using their hands like little feet, and they're trying to figure out how the track was made, and they're looking and they're shaping with their hands what the animal must be. And Sarah and I just were like in heaven. I'm just like, I always want to have Bushmen with me anywhere I go forever.
Yeah, it must have been fascinating to see them, to see the way they learn, the way they act when they don't know something. Wow.
And well, that's what you see little children do. Until the adults tell them, don't behave that way. Don't get your knees dirty. Right? But you see children do it. Whenever we bring children to the Kalahari that are not, our children from the US or from Europe or from Australia, when we bring our children there, the Bushmen immediately grab them and take them away from us. And the kids come back like completely electrified and all alive, and forever their lives will always be changed because that infectious curiosity, that passion to learn, to explore, to play, they never lose it their whole life, even into their 90s. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I want to share. We got to bring that back because that is such a riches. We talked about riches in the beginning. That is pure gold.
Oh yeah, it is. I can feel it in my body right now.
Oh, good. Yes. Hey, it must be getting dark over there.
Yeah. Night is coming and I'm stuck in my chair. So, and the baby is finally sleeping.
Lovely. Well, he's been good company.
Yeah, he's nice.
Well, he's helped us too because he is the future generations. I really appreciated him being with us today.
Thank you.
Tell him thank you for me.
I will.
Okay.
So thank you, Jon. Thank you for all that stories and the sharing about parenting and community and nature, and to bring home hope about the way we can still bring that back to our lives.
Don't lose that hope. Keep it going. We need it. Thank
Yeah.
you, Justine. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Si cet épisode vous a plu, n'hésitez pas à ajouter un j'aime sous la vidéo, à laisser votre avis, à la partager autour de vous et à vous abonner pour être tenu au courant de la sortie des prochains épisodes. Vous pouvez aussi visiter le site de Graines de Sauvage pour vous inscrire à la newsletter et être tenu informé des activités. Allez faire un tour sur Instagram pour d'autres contenus sur la connexion et la nature. Merci et à bientôt!